Okay. Again, my name is Glenn Kessler. I'm president of HCD Research, and we welcome you to our webinar, Consumer Research During Difficult Times. And of course, these are difficult. In the past, there have been national and international crises that have caused situations similar to this, precipitous declines in research, mostly due to travel restrictions, as we're seeing now. As we progress during this webinar, feel free to ask questions as they come up, and we will address them possibly in real time, but certainly at the end of the program. I will be speaking on some background issues related to what has happened in past crises like 9/11 and the downturn of 2008 and 2009. Dr. Michelle Niedziela will be providing the heart of the program, and that will be on methods and ideas during this time to manage yourself during this time. And then Allison Gutkowski will be managing questions and answers at the end of the program. I'll just say that this is a unique time. You may have some exceptional needs, and we're committed to try to solve them. We encourage any vendors on this program participating in it, in the webinar. Feel free to contact us if you want to partner, and we will do the same with you. And next, just a very brief background on the hosts of this, HCD. We've been in business for 28 years. We conduct research all over the world, and we offer methodologies that are cognitive, neuro, and psychological. And we consider ourselves methodology agnostic, which means we'll select the optimal combinations of methods to solve the problem. At this time, options are narrow, and we'll be reviewing ways to try to maintain timelines using methodologies appropriate for the time. Now, this next slide is sort of an overview of my experience in the past crises. And as I said, we've been in business since 1993 and went through two major national and world events that impacted our clients and impacted us. So there were two of them that I'm going to focus on. And one of them, of course, was 9/11, which was very precipitous. It happened one day, and it ended commerce for a while. As now, there were restrictions on airline travel with clients. That ended in-person research for some time. There was a precipitous change in the mood of consumers. So what consumers may have felt about a product's positioning on 9/10/2001 was different than how they would feel about the positioning of different classes of products on 9/12. Companies then, we noted, appeared to be inward focused and less focused on changing customer perceptions. So I think it could be a function of everyone focusing on their environment and less focused on the target markets. Specific industries like leisure and travel were really impacted, as you know. And we found that after 9/11, it was 2 months until we started to see a close to, not normal, but a close to normal flow of new business. And so in this situation is different. It's an ongoing event, so we don't know. But one of the things that we saw in terms of innovation that related to the 9/11 calamity was the use of online research. Previously, this was early in the internet era, there was concern about maybe differences in samples of people who use the internet and people who didn't use the internet. And after 9/11, those concerns sort of went away out of necessity. And of course now, there is no question that the vast majority of people use the internet, and probably the only people who don't are not in your target market. Telweb became more common, and telephone IDIs grew in use. And a different crisis was the downturn. And again, this was slow. It hit a day in September when the market crashed. What we saw then were meetings and travel budgets declined dramatically. Research budgets were impacted. Screening of R&D programs left only the strongest to survive. So research related to R&D issues evaporated. Consumer confidence declined dramatically, and some consumer companies modified their positioning. And my thought is that luxury, for example, luxury products had a different meaning in 2009 than they did in most of 2008. And that's important in that you want to make sure you're not selling attributes and perceptions that aren't relevant at the time based on environmental changes. The response we saw from our clients was smaller projects, more online research, hence the decrease in qualitative research. And an issue I want to just reiterate is some products may be positioned inconsistently with the environment. So I mentioned a luxury product promoted in 2009 has a different meaning and feeling than one promoted in possibly 2019. Airlines changed their positioning to adapt to consumer attitudes. And the one thing I saw that I thought was lacking was the potential, if this is going to last some months, to reposition yourself in a way that's consistent with the way people are feeling. For the balance of and the heart of the presentation, I'm going to introduce Dr. Michelle Niedziela, who's our Scientific Director and Vice President of Innovation at HCD Research, and she is going to take the rest of the program. Thank you for participating, and good luck.
Thanks, Glenn. We're not physicians here. My doctorate is in behavioral neuroscience. So I'm not here to tell you anything about, the virus itself. Please visit the cdc.gov or WHO website to find out more information about it. But I will be talking about this in terms of research and all of our industry and the work that we're still trying to do. As you know, the status is a little bit different state to state, country to country, but most of us are working from home now. So I assume a lot of you are working from home. Glenn assures me he's wearing nice shirt and he also combed his hair today, so that's really good. We don't know, however, because we're not working in the same place. Just kind of lighten things up a bit. I work at home now with my husband working from home and 2 kids, a toddler and a 3-month-old. And the joke that's going around, you may have seen on the internet lately, is to describe your children you're working from home with as your coworkers. And so I will share that my coworker pooped on me today. So just to kind of keep things a little lighthearted in these serious times, we're all trying just to make things work. Many people deal with travel restrictions right now. There are, shutdowns with schools. Different industries are certainly being affected, with restaurants being affected quite a bit currently, and people are worried about their jobs. We're going to be talking about different recommendations, but of course there's recommendations on how you should be working from home as well. And of course, again, visit the cdc.gov if you have further questions about that. As we go on, I just also want to bring up at the top of your screen somewhere, I think you should have the choice to go into the Q&A. If you have any questions during this presentation, please feel free to put them in there. And I'm going to try to check it here and there to see if there's anything we can address to make this more interactive during the call. So again, please don't hesitate to reach out. Additionally, as Glenn said, if you have any ideas about the things that you'd like to collaborate on or work with, we're all in this together. So let's definitely work together to make it through this and to help everybody during these more difficult times. So what is going on at HCD right now? We're letting our moral compass sort of direct us and trying to remain very flexible. Our concerns are, of course, with our employees, our research partners, anything from the qualitative partners we worked with and quantitative partners, everybody we partner with there, our clients, research participants, and of course the quality of the research. These are all our main concerns that we're trying to focus on, keeping the safety of all the people involved, as well as trying to help our clients get quality research. With keeping in mind that it's really our civic duty to flatten the curve. You can see on the image on the left that just one person can really protect the next line of people that they come into contact with by not exposing themselves. And you've probably all seen this curve through the news, but the effort here is to flatten that curve so that we don't put the brunt of everything onto our healthcare system. As such, projects that we have had in the past 2 weeks, we have adjusted and things have changed going forward since then. But what we started doing as this started becoming an issue was making sure that we were screening participants that were coming onto sites, offering protection to participants as well as people that were attending the research, and ultimately remaining flexible, right? So anything that needed to be postponed or changing the way we were doing things, for example, not having central location testing and moving it to something more online, or just trying to brainstorm with our clients how they can still get towards their research goals while still maintaining the safety of everybody that would be involved. So that's what we've been doing the past 2 weeks. Of course, that's changing as we move along, where we really don't want to encourage too much of anybody coming into contact with anybody else. In that case, we are looking to go virtual, obviously, with our qualitative research, online IDIs, et cetera, quantitative research going virtual, and using applied neuroscience in ways that are virtual as well. So how is that really possible? As you heard from Glenn, our company has really been playing in the space of understanding how products and marketing really work together. And we've been using an applied consumer neuroscience approach to make sure there is this sort of harmonization going on with product and marketing. So we're really grounded in that holistic experience that consumers have when they are perceiving products and brands, and how all that really works together. Now, originally we were going to be having our Neuro University where we discuss all this with different people in our community and invite everybody to come in to New Jersey. This year it was going to be in Princeton. That was going to be held in June. We are looking to postpone that until later in the year. So that's to be decided right now. But just to keep it on your radar, it's where we really bring in the scientists, the leading scientists in various areas that are involved in applied neuroscience, as well as academic people to come in to talk about some of the latest findings and approaches, and also about innovation and flexibility, which is really what we're talking about now. But that will happen later this year, hopefully. Of course, we're going to continue to monitor, but feel free to reach out if you'd like to be added to that list. Otherwise, you can also find out more information at neurou.info, which is the website for that. We'll keep you up to date on what the changes are for that. But that's a little bit of more information about what we do. This is a slide about how we do it, or how we were doing it, right? So we had 3 buckets, which were the neuroscientific, traditional research, and psychological and behavioral research. In the neuroscientific bucket, it really was, one-on-one, where a person would come into contact with another person. So it had to be on site to wire people up. So things like heart rate, skin conductance, facial EMG, facial coding, EEG, eye tracking, all those things are done in person. traditional research, you know, the interviews, focus groups, surveys, concept tests, things of that sort, as well as psychological and behavioral research using implicit response, psychological assessment, cognition, emotional batteries, et cetera, and so on. But of course, things have changed. Going virtual, there are certain things that we don't recommend doing, or finding a different way to go about doing them. So, you know, although it is possible, and you may be able to find something if you were to search enough online, of being able to do something like facial coding, or maybe looking at heart rate through a webcam, it's not something we would actually recommend. So it's not something that we'll be moving forward with currently as we adapt to a more virtual approach to things. But I will discuss some ways in which we can replace some of those measures. And I'm happy to talk about any reasons why we wouldn't do those. So again, if you are interested in having any questions about this, then, you know, I'm happy to talk about it. That being said, moving forward, I'm going to be checking over and over again to see if there's any Q&A. So if you have any questions as we go through this, please don't hesitate to go ahead and write it in there, and I will try to respond as best I can.
Hey, Michelle.
Yeah.
Allison jumping in here. I got a great question.
Yeah.
So something like facial coding, you know, that's typically done online. Why would you cross it out in this case?
Yeah, there's a couple of reasons. Facial coding can be a little bit finicky, even in the best of situations where you're measuring them in person. First of all, you do want to have a very high quality camera when you're doing that, and have some control over the environment. And that's probably the most important part, is having control over the environment. Facial coding looks at people's facial expressions. And the thing about it is people make facial expressions in response often to the way someone is looking at them. And so it's very difficult, even in the best of situations, to tell what they're really responding to. For example, if you were going to show them an ad and you had somebody smiling in the ad, people's autonomic response would be to smile back. They don't even realize that they would be smiling back, but they automatically smile back. And so keeping that in mind, it's very difficult to interpret facial coding in the best of times. But when it comes to webcam versions, it's even more difficult in that then you have to deal with the noise of lighting, as well as, you know, internet connection. You also have to deal with any distractions that may be going on that you can't even see in their environment. So when it comes to something like that, we're definitely a lot more cautious about using that sort of measure. The same thing sort of goes with heart rate as well. Some people will say that you can do heart rate on using the webcam. We've actually taken, you know, some internal tests to see how that would actually work, and found that the online version of heart rate is exactly the opposite. You know, we've seen exactly the opposite results in the moment by moment. So we definitely don't recommend going forward with that. I see there's a couple of other questions here. As far as global roles, are we reviewing these types of methodologies for specific countries? Yeah, so that's another thing, I guess, about facial coding, is that although some of the theory has said that, you know, it's supposed to be universal, we actually do see that there's different types of responses that you can have between different cultures. And so that's important to keep in mind. There's also a question here about what alternative methods could you use for emotions. We will be getting to that later in this talk. So I'm going to, with that, move on to discuss a little bit more. Okay, but again, feel free to jump in with any questions. Eye tracking can actually be done online, and one of our partners that we work with quite often is IVP. If you have interest in doing online eye tracking, feel free to reach out to us or to them. Check out their website on this. As you may know, eye tracking is a sensor technology that you can use, possible on a computer or other device, to see where the person's looking. An eye tracker can detect, you know, the visual attention someone's having. And it gives you a really good measure of human behavior, especially if you're looking at any sort of websites, or maybe some print ad or some sort of ad like that. There's a lot of different options there. You can learn a lot from it. As you can see in the image that's here, this is a really great example of how an eye tracking study showed that when you have the person in an ad actually look at the messaging, it directs the eyes to look at that messaging too. So you can influence people's behavior just by the elements of the ad. So that was pretty interesting there, but that can be done online. Implicit association and looking at consumers' perceptions. This can also be done online. For those of you that may not be as familiar, implicit association testing is a system 1 psychological testing methodology to really look at the mental biases and associations that people may not be able to tell you. For example, you know, if they look at a color, they may not be able to tell you that they feel that that color is healthy. You know, they can tell you it's blue, but the fact that they associate it with being healthy is something that they may not be able to outwardly articulate to you, but when you have them do this sort of matching game, they can sort of reveal that. Example I like to give to sort of oversimplify it a little bit, but I think you'll understand what I'm getting at. If we're talking about names and you have to decide for something like the name Jennifer, is this a more often a female name or a male name, you'll very quickly probably respond that it's a female name, mainly because you have heard the name Jennifer associated with females more than males. And so this is a strong association you have because you've experienced that. However, with something like the name Taylor, you've probably heard it as a female name, I mean, Taylor Swift, right? But perhaps you've also met a male whose name is Taylor. So that may not be as strong a connection to being a female name. So in that case, that would be a weaker association. And the idea here is that the faster you respond, the stronger that association is between the concept and the descriptor. So in this case on the screen, you can see here that the person's looking at a bottle of shampoo and they have to decide whether or not it's energizing. And all they'd have to do is click on the keyboard or touch the screen, and their times would be measured. You can use this to replace things like CATA, and where that can be really, CATA is check all to apply. You can get beyond just what's you often get in CATA. So where in CATA, you might see that, you know, the product A here is relaxed, well, so is product B and D because the person just checked them off. But when you do something like an implicit association, you can start to see the nuanced differences where there are higher associations for relaxed with A and B, but only moderate for product D. So you can see how that can give you a bit more information about how people are really feeling that they can't easily articulate to you. It's fast. It doesn't take much time in your current survey. It's also relatively inexpensive and can complement deeper insights. So you can add it to other things that you're doing. We are also working on a DIY platform and we're doing custom work as well. A DIY platform is something that you could just work on your own with, so you don't have to work so closely with us to design your implicit test, and it's something you could just, you know, have ongoing, and you know, you can get our help if you need to, but with some initial guidance to ensure, you know, quality and understanding of how to use the platform, you can then so move forward and start to use it on your own and get really fast, actionable insights in that way. Allison, let me know if there's any other questions I should address.
Thanks, Michelle. I actually got a quick question.
Yeah.
What are limitations to something like an implicit test?
Yes, there's a couple of different things. You want to keep the words really simple, right? So if you're going to compare words like fun versus rejuvenated, we're looking at reaction time. So fun is obviously a shorter word to read. Rejuvenated takes longer to read. Now there's back-end work we can do, but it's much better to choose words that are pretty simple that people can understand. You also want to choose words that fit a sentence that people can easily, you know, fit for the, say, the product or the brand. So for example, the brand is happy, you know, so the brand is X, Y, and Z, or the product is X, Y, and Z. You can also look at emotions where, you know, the prompting sentence would be something like the product makes me feel indulged, makes me feel comforted. But again, we like to keep those words pretty simple. We also like to have the stimuli as being pretty simple, not overcomplicated. And you also want to limit maybe the number of words unless you want to do multiple IATs. So we like to keep it, around 15 or less. We have certainly done more than 15 words to test, maybe with, you can now do maybe 8 or somewhere around 8 different brands or concepts or whatever it might be, products. But we can make it work by splitting samples or doing multiple implicit tests, but all those are options. Where can you use these sort of things? Now, typically we would do things like, you could do this for sensory differentiation if you're going to have people come on site and smell something. Obviously, that's not something we're really looking at right now, but in the future, that's something you could do. You can look at emotional experiences. You can use it to look at disruptive innovation, product renovations, concepts that you want to test. Look at drivers analysis, because we can certainly combine the results with other research that you're doing, other quantitative measures. We can identify need gaps with it, fit to concept, brand harmony, brand tracking, which could be really interesting in these times. As Glenn was mentioning, it's definitely something we could see to adapt our brands to the changing sentiments and the changing perceptions. Good example there was that luxury question, with the economic downturn that happened in 2008 and 2009, people's reactions to luxury items changed. I think Peloton might be a really interesting one right now, where they had that sort of bad press a little bit ago. And then now it's actually, the perceptions are changing, where people are kind of like, oh, well, maybe being able to work out from home online with a gym type situation would be better than going to a gym. So we can also assess consumer perceptions to get sort of like a brand personality, which can be really helpful. Another approach that we use a lot that can be done online is looking at Max TIF. That's something you might be familiar with. Max TIF is an approach for obtaining preference and importance scores, looking at different items, multiple items. Maybe you have like 20 or 30 even different statements that you want to look at, like the drink is healthy, the drink is tasty, the drink is satisfying, and see which one is more important. So it's a forced choice situation where the participant has to say that what's most important to them when they're choosing a beverage is that it's tasty. That's more important than it being healthy, right? So when they're forced to make those choices, then you can really learn by seeing the rankings of what ends up being most important. And then we can actually do something like combine these two together, which tends to be really insightful. So in this case, if you see in Max TIF scores that, healthy comes up as being really important, then you look at the products and see, okay, where does healthy lie? And it turns out that product A, maybe it's your product and you don't have a high association with healthy. Well, there's an opportunity, because healthy is most important, but you're not communicating that to your consumers. And in this case, none of the products were fulfilling this most important need of healthy. And so that presents an opportunity to maybe strengthen that association through communication, or maybe, changing the shape or color of a bottle, for example, can connote ideas of healthiness, change the perceptions a bit to really meet those consumer needs. Any questions before I jump into the next portion?
Just out of curiosity, when we think about drivers and needs, do you think that the current situation and crisis is affecting people's perceptions? And should we really even, kind of put a little asterisk next to any of the data that we collect because of people's current mindsets?
I think that now is a really good time to measure something like that, because I think people's perceptions, to what Glenn was saying about like perceptions of luxury, change, right, with what's going on. I know my own perceptions of sustainability, for example, have changed. When there's like toilet paper shortages out there, you really start thinking about something like sustainability, right? So just thinking about how people are now approaching maybe some of the goods that they buy, they're learning right now, and the things that they're learning are going to influence their future purchases. So understanding what's most important to people could be really insightful for how to develop new products going forward. And this could be really good for disruptive innovation as well. One of the exercises I used to do in a past life when I worked at a different company, when we were looking at innovation, was to think about, okay, let's think, 20 years from now, what does the world look like? What sort of crises might exist? And then try to design products around that crisis. Well, here we are in a crisis. Well, what would we develop for people right now? And that can really reveal some of the, innovation opportunities that may be out there to design better products that meet needs that people don't necessarily realize they need. So, measuring in a time like this could be really informative to sort of get at those needs that weren't coming to the top before. So another way to measure emotion outside of, asking people through the implicit test to make associations between brands or products and emotional words is to use something like the self-assessment mannequin. So this approach is using a nonverbal pictorial scale. So you can see the scales on the left. The top one is sad versus happy. The middle one is calm versus excited, like an arousal. And the bottom one is whether or not they're, unmotivated versus motivated. And so here you can start to see, what the person's reaction is, that they're going to use this nonverbal scale to sort of say how they feel in 3 different dimensions. And so by having in 3 different dimensions, you can start to map out how someone actually feels. You can also look at a composite score of the SAM score to look at emotional engagement that can give you an idea of maybe which prototype, in this case, is more engaging, significantly so. Right? But also you can use our patented mood mapping. We have a mood map light that we can do, because typically we would do mood mapping with physiological measures in person, as you can see to the left. And just so you all know, that picture is of Allison. So you can actually see one of us on the screen here. That's Allison wearing some of the gear that we would typically do if we were doing physiological measures. So normally we would do the mood mapping through those. And be able to show that, okay, if someone is feeling more aroused, more excited, and also feeling very pleasant, well, they're probably feeling happy, right? Whereas if they're feeling unpleasant and aroused, they might be angry, something to that sort. But we can also do that using the SAM scores as well and start to map out their response. And this way you can start to compare, say, 2 different products, 5 different products, whatever it might be, to see which one is more in the area you want to be. Or maybe even in another sense to see, okay, what are people's reactions to a product? And then what are their reactions to the branding of that product? How well do those things match? Thinking about more like a harmonization between brand and product, making sure that product meets the promise. A lot of that is that emotional engagement. So being able to show that they're in the same quadrant, in the same neighborhood of each other, that your marketing is matching your product is very important, and something that we can do using this measure. Any questions moving forward on that one? Again, this is something that can be totally done online. And all the results, everything, can be done online, doesn't have to be done in person. It's something that we've converted our physiological measures to be able to do. So another thing that this could present as a really good time, as I was mentioning before, is really finding a way to use this time to better understand our consumers and create a consumer technical model to be able to disrupt behavior, so to innovate, basically. So this involves a lot of different stages, a lot of phases of research, but the goal is to understand habits. So doing a lot of qualitative upfront work that can be done either through some sort of like social media anthropology, where you're going through social media, looking at Reddit, looking at discussion boards, all these sort of things to understand consumers' habits and the language that they use around different products and brands and product spaces. And then you take that understanding of how they use a product or how they engage a brand, and you prioritize their needs and their perceptions using the Max TIF and the implicit, right? So now you understand the need gaps. And this gives you those innovation opportunities that you can start to develop. And then, further down the line, once the coronavirus situation is a little more cleared up, you can actually start to validate and test these products with people, and then validate that consumer experience to make sure it matches, once again, that you're fulfilling those need gaps. So what does that look like? Well, in the past, we've used different language that we were able to find, maybe in qualitative work, to be able to put those statements and those words in a Max TIF to find out what the top needs were. And then we tested to find out what the perceptions were. Here, we're looking at snacks. The research question was, how can we increase consideration of choosing a snacking chocolate for an everyday snack? So thinking about the snacks that people typically have, and taking that language, putting in the Max TIF, finding that people really were looking for something kind of relaxing and like a little bit of a treat, right? A luxurious taste. And then seeing, okay, when they look at the different snacks, what do they perceive them as? And then looking for opportunities to develop ways to communicate that to really meet those needs. Or maybe even developing different products that are going to meet those needs. So it's all about using this research to develop nudges. And so if you're familiar at all with some behavioral economic approaches, this really fits into that schema by being able to better understand how people think about things and how people are making their decisions. What are the cues, routines, and rewards that ultimately add up to their habits, and be able to develop brands and products, brand communications and products to really influence that behavior. So this is talking about that a little more in depth, but if anybody has a question, again, feel free to sort of step in here. Happy to talk about that. And I think this is also a really good opportunity to sort of reach out to potential partners as well. So if you're a qualitative company and you have maybe some interest in this, or you have some interesting ideas that you would like to add to something like this, perhaps we can work together. Feel free to reach out, and maybe it's something that we can jump in on together. Again, it's all about working together and making things work in these different times. Now, in all of this, I think it's really important to think about limitations. The kind of joke here is that until you spread your wings, you'll have no idea how far you can walk. And so it's important to recognize that all methodologies out there and all technologies have limitations. Whether we're looking at social listening or, doing, like I said before, facial coding online, or maybe looking at heart rate online, there really is no perfect tool that's going to cover all the research questions out there. So it really is about making sure to be able to identify the limitations that are out there, identify, what the appropriate tools are to use for the research question, make sure you're using the right one, because they all answer different questions, right? They're all appropriate in different situations. But this is even more important when we start to move things online and change the way we do things. So when we think about, how we're doing the biometrics, how we're doing neuro and psychological research, and how we're doing qualitative research and quantitative research, it's very important to make sure that we are aware of the limitations that are out there, because ultimately we want to make sure that the quality of research is staying high, right? And so the insights that we're delivering are going to still be insightful and meets those research goals, and the timing of the research as well. We have to be aware of the limitations that can happen there. So, is timing going to be affected if we're trying to do more online work? Is it, going to help speed things up? Or there, things that we can add in there that are going to be like looking at big data or some sort of AI approaches, all things that we're playing with internally here at HCD. But just making sure that we keep all of these things in mind, that these different inputs of research can all have different limitations. So some key takeaways I want to pass off to you is that, first and foremost, safety should be all of our main concern. Safety of our employees, safety of our partners and clients, and of course our research participants. However, we do strongly believe that the show can go on. We can continue to do consumer research as long as we're taking these precautions and adapting the research to still answer the research question, but do it in a different way perhaps, while still maintaining the research of value. It's very important, we still believe, to combine implicit or neuroscientific or psychological tools with the cognitive traditional tools that we're already doing with surveys and qual, because they can really provide valuable insights, and even virtually. And we see this as an opportunity to further innovate the way we do things, and maybe even streamline the way that we do things, right? In this morning, I actually had to pick up some medication for my infant, and I did it through the CVS drive-through, and that it didn't always exist, right? But there are reasons now that it's very important to be able to do that. Grocery delivery, right? These things, maybe people didn't use as much before, are starting to become more important. And so this is an opportunity for us all to maybe lean in to some flexible tools and see how they can provide further value. Because now might be the best time to understand and explore perceptions and products and brands. So any questions, please, again, feel free to put them into the Q&A on your options there, top of your screen, I believe. Otherwise, please feel free to follow us on Twitter, where we're going to continue to talk about the scientific approaches to doing this type of research, the neuroscientific, the psychological, as well as integrating it in with the traditional. Visit our blog, where we continue to talk about innovative approaches. Catherine is really doing a great job at talking about some of the different approaches, some new research out there and new approaches to things. Glenn, our fearless leader, feel free to ask me questions anytime. You can email me directly. Allison, do you have any questions to add?
Yeah, I see a lot of our friends that have joined us today are from R&D or product development, and likely a lot of their research really depends on being in person or having access to both consumer and product prototypes. Do you have any thoughts or advice for them, as it's, really difficult to see, food and sharing in that sense?
Yeah, I think a couple of things that I would kind of mention there for the product people. Of course, product ultimately needs to be experienced by the consumer, right? If you're doing your testing. But this isn't going to be forever. And so one thing is that there's an opportunity here to better understand the consumer. I think if you were at Pangborn this past year, the Pangborn conference, it was talking about how consumer research took like a turn and started focusing on the product more than on the consumer. So instead of focusing on how the consumer felt, it was more about product performance. And this may actually be an opportunity to really start to rethink about refocusing back on the consumer, really understanding the consumer's situation, their perceptions, their emotions, their consumer needs, and using that to design better products. And this is a really good time to do that, I believe. As far as continuing to do the actual product research, I think there's a couple of solutions there. One is that you can definitely test concepts and different parts of the ultimate pie, right, online still. On top of that, there may be ways that we can lean into using some in-home research as well. So sending products to participants and having them, experience the product and reporting online in different surveys. We've done quite a bit of home use studies, and we're happy to talk about that with you if you have any questions. But there's definitely some different approaches that can still be done on the product side.
And I want to revisit a question from earlier, just as we, have now been exposed to these different ideas. Are they all global? Is there any limitations to doing something, let's say, SAM, in an Asian market versus European versus South America?
The advantage of SAM is that it's nonverbal, right? So you don't have any language barrier there. One thing that you definitely find when you're doing emotional research around the globe is that the nuances of the words are really important, right? So when you do your translations, not only do you have to think, is this an accurate translation of the word happy for this context, right? But even further, what sort of word would this particular culture use? So even though it's Spanish, could it be that it's different in European Spanish versus Central American Spanish, right? Would they use a different word for this? So that's one of the examples of something you do have to think about when you're using emotional terminology. But with SAM, you don't have any terminology. Instead, you have people using the pictorial scale. And so it's actually an ideal measure for doing global research in that sense.
Great. And another question, do we think that there's any systematic bias that COVID-19 is imparting on our consumer behavior or mindset that we should consider in whether or not continuing to running testing with the consumers?
Yes. So, that's a difficult question because on the one hand, obviously people are higher anxiety right now. And so, they're perceptions of different types of products are different. But I think that that's important information, because as we move forward, now is an opportunity to sort of reshape those perceptions. Like, how can you, so much of brand loyalty, for example, people who are really loyal to a particular product, has to do with their emotional connection. So really understanding how our consumers feel is going to be really important for how we're going to continue to communicate with them during and then after this situation, because their needs are shifting and we have to shift with them. So, as Glenn was mentioning before, with these other crises that have happened, consumer sentiment and perception changed. And so if you're not tracking that, if you're not measuring that, then your products may not fit as well, right? So again, like luxury in 2009 is not the same as 2019. Or now 2020. So being able to understand those changes and move with them and understand our consumers is still very important.
And how do I know if anything that's happening is really affecting my brand?
Mm-hmm. Well, the only way to actually know is measure, right? But I think that that's kind of the key to doing that. One of the best ways probably to do that would be tracking. So you could do implicit. Implicit would be really good for that, for example, to track their perceptions of a particular type of brand or product over time, or product space even, right? So, how are their perceptions changing? Again, that's going to inform how you're going to be moving forward with your branding or with your product development, to really, again, meet those needs, meet those perceptions, stay current, stay relevant, and stay connected to your consumer.
Great. And I want to go back to the question of the SAM and just the global application of whether it be SAM or Max TIF and Implicit. Is there any difference between CPG and pharma in their application and their appropriateness?
You can definitely use any of those methods for any of them. We have seen some more complications on using implicit with pharma, some of pharma, not all, but because a lot of implicit has to do with familiarity, right? So sometimes when you have to think about who you're testing. So as long as you're testing people who are familiar with that type of product, then you can use any one of those measures. Otherwise, I would probably lean towards looking at Max TIF and SAM together, as opposed to Max TIF and implicit. But if people are familiar with that product or that product space a little more, then you could probably do the implicit. So that could be something to think about. Any of those measures would be, we found to work really good in the product space, or in the communication space as well. So packaging, as well as, looking at products and brands.
Okay, great.
And I think that this is an opportunity for all of us to innovate together. I have been, following some things that other people are doing right now, and just thinking of the different ways to work, et cetera. Now is an opportunity for us to talk to each other and develop new things. So my position is that I am VP of Research and Innovation. And I think innovation is key during this time. We have to adjust and roll with it, right? And do the best type of research, the most appropriate type of research, keeping validity in mind, and being aware of what's important, right? So again, the safety, as well as the making sure of the quality of the research that comes out. So we're definitely looking forward to working with, some of our partners to develop ways to work, new ways to work.
And Michelle, out of curiosity, do you know how this crisis is affecting different industries, whether it be someone like us on the research side, or our friends at pharma, or CPG, or sensory?
Yeah, my world has always been a little bit more in the CPG side, right, and the sensory side. I do know from my friends and previous coworkers that what's going on with them is that there has been slowdown, right, on the client side of projects that are going through, definitely travel restrictions, but and some budget cutting, right? So we've been, as far as our side has been, adjusting to that and remaining flexible. So trying to stay within budgets that are changing, adjusting research in ways that for our clients that can't travel to be on site for anything, we've come up with ways for them to be able to see things live, right? So whether we're showing video for them to be able to see things happening, or adjusting the way we deliver any of our research to be more real time has been really key. Looking at some of the discussion boards that are out there for research providers, obviously there's an extreme slowdown on CLT, right? So central location testing. But there is a slight rise that's going on right now on anything that can be done online. So these, again, that's an opportunity if you're a provider to think about how you can adjust to help the clients get that sort of work done. But there's definitely some caution in the air of people definitely needing to meet their deadlines and meet their research goals for the year, because again, that's where all our performance is gauged on. So we want to make sure that we can do that in the safest and most reliable way possible.
Great. And I have one more question. Do we think that consumers' personality will have a strong impact on their product choice? And do you feel that there will now be a strong shift in personality profiling?
I do. And that's kind of why I keep bringing up this idea of tracking a bit, because I think that it will be important to track how people perceive products as being sort of we call it the brand personality, as you were calling it. Do they still continue to view this product as convenient, or this brand as trustworthy? Those sort of things could shift, and they will be really important for developers and branding managers, et cetera, to know and understand moving forward how that is shifting and how their communications are influencing that. So when we do, brand tracking with something like an implicit test, you want to be able to track, okay, some sort of baseline. If we start now, see how your communications and your maybe branding that you're doing or product changes, how is that shifting that perception? So it'd be important to start now to do that, to see where you're going with any of those changes that you make as we move forward, or maybe actually come up with things that could make for more appropriate or better communications or product changes.
Great. And we have a question around all of our favorite topic, GDPR.
Yes.
So given GDPR, and I can help answer this question as well, is live streaming a feasibility for research in the EU?
Mm-hmm. I think it probably depends what you want to live stream, right?
Right. So we've seen, each country has different interpretations, and even within our different clients have different interpretations. So it's really a case-by-case basis. And yes, absolutely. What are we looking to live stream and things of that sort? So we will follow up with you on that, as well as Maria will follow up with you to talk a little bit more in detail. But with that, Michelle, I think this has been really helpful, and it seems like we're all trying to navigate. I know, just touching base with a couple of our friends, it's kind of a day by day, and I think this week was a big kind of what's next type of week, a turning point, if you will. So it's really going to be interesting to see what's going on moving forward, and we always encourage everyone to keep the lines of communication open and share your experiences with, whether they're your vendors or your clients or folks in your past life, so we can all really stay on top of this.
Yeah, let's work together to make it work. Again, feel free also to send us, tweet at us at HCD Neuroscientist. If you have little kids, let us know what your little kid coworkers are doing as you're working from home. I guess another funny one I would have for anybody who's toilet trained a toddler is my coworker asked me to wipe her butt this morning. So there you go. Just some levity. But yeah, reach out anytime. Love to hear from you. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.